If you want a real clown show when it comes to editing a document, then do these common mistakes. Hey, this is Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. A lot of times you're going to do assignments for clients where there are multiple people involved, and they are going to want to add, change, remove, edit, really want to tweak the story when it comes to the copy that you write. And it is a massive mistake to let this happen. So I'm going to share with you some common mistakes that are made when doing collaborative editing, whether it's internal to your office, maybe you have researchers, copywriters, junior copywriters, all working on the same set of work, or when you're working with your client, especially today when we have a lot of software that allows multiple editors in one document. So the first mistake is not to have a single individual who is responsible for the modifications and edits of those documents. Now, there could be a backup person or someone who reviews those changes, but ultimately your changes and your agreement to content is done in some kind of draft. So you'll have a draft document. All your modifications are made in that document. There's comments, there's change controls, there's other inputs, but those are all done by one individual. And they may have an assistant, but it's just one individual. The draft document is then reviewed by all the contributors. So how does the contributors' material get into the document? Well, they don't go in and make any edits or modifications. Now, they can go in and highlight things. They can go in and put comments in a document, but they are not to modify the document in any way, and you can use track changes to monitor that. Because when you get a bunch of people making changes and nobody knows who made what change, your document will rapidly turn into chaos. It will be a clown show beyond all means. It'll be like makeup on a pig. It's just going to be ridiculous. So again, the contributors can put material into the document only by a separate contribution. So the contributor would send an email and say, oh, by the way, paragraph 5, line 3, it says X. I really think it should say Y. Great. The person who edits the document can read that, can make a decision, put it in the document. They can also do some fact checking. So another mistake that people make is no fact checking. If you have a change, you need a rationale or a reason why the change is being made. So why should the headline say, are you making these 3 mistakes in collaborative editing versus are you making these common mistakes with content editing? Well, you can test both headlines when it comes down to actually implementing, but if you're spending 30 minutes having a discussion and having everybody agree upon it, you're not going to get anything done. Another mistake is proving the negative. If something is omitted from a sales piece, it is not your role to explain why it was omitted, because it really doesn't matter whether it's there or not. Because testing in copywriting is really what tells you what works. If someone believes something should be added, they need to provide their reasons why it should be added to the document. So your reasons about why it's not there are not as valuable to articulate because you as the writer or the person who's editing the document doesn't have the full context about the product. Now they might because you've done research and you've focused on it. But in the collaborative editing session, so if you're doing a large technical paper, you might have subject matter experts. And if a subject matter expert says, why did you not mention the carbon composition of our new widget? It's not your job to explain to them why it's not there. You can give them a one sentence about why it's not there, but if they truly believe why it should be in the document, they can provide to you in writing the reason why it should be in the document. Because it's possible that your sales piece is written in a very common language. So talking about carbon compositions may not be appropriate to that common language audience. Maybe the sales piece was written specifically for the final financial decision maker. And so you just explain how strong the product is rather than the chemical composition or the carbon composition, where a more scientific paper for an engineering decision maker might go into details about why the carbon composition is far superior to a polyethylene model or some other type of model. It's very important that you don't get hung up on arguing, or you don't just say, fine, I'll put it in there. Because if someone says, hey, why didn't you mention the chemical composition? You can simply say, well, this piece is for a non-technical audience. And then you have to ask the question, why is it important that we include that? See, the why it's important is more valuable in a copywriting piece than actually mention the chemical composition, because sometimes when you're looking at the market analysis, looking at everybody has the same chemical composition. So mentioning it has no value. Mentioning why yours is different is where the valuation is. Now, see, if the subject matter person was qualified to make that decision, they'd be writing the sales letter in the first place. So it's a collaborative effort, but everyone has to be clear about their roles. So there's another mistake is not having a central place to collect all this research. You're going to have contributors who give you statements. Okay, hey, I think you should mention the chemical composition. Here's why. You're going to have all these other statements of why the composition's important. Why is it written this way? Who's the audience? What's the a avatar of that audience? Collecting all of that in one place around the campaign or the copy that you're writing allows you to then later recycle the whole batch. So let's say you're writing a sales letter for the financial decision maker of a complex product. You get that done, and then the customer says, okay, well, now we need the engineer to buy in. You don't have to go back and get all of the research again. You don't have to now say, okay, well, we're writing the same thing for a different audience. Give me new inputs. No, you can go back to the inputs and then through the draft process, extract the elements that are relevant for the engineering audience that builds on the non-technical audience. So the engineer, how do they make decisions? Well, they might make decisions more analytically based, more requirements based, where the financial person may make it more financially based. You can create that differentiation in a new draft rather than doing new research, collecting new information. You really want to minimize the amount of work that your contributors have to put in. And this is important because the more your contributors are involved in the decision of the final document, the less the final document is going to fit the audience that you're writing for. You've got to understand this. Once you develop an avatar, everything in your draft is about that audience. It's not about the way the boss says it. It's not the way the old salespeople said it. It's really about that audience and that audience match. Now, you're going to get feedback about marketing items like, hey, I don't think that paragraph's very persuasive. Okay, what does that mean? Give me something in writing that explains to me what you mean by that. And that way you can offline extract it. Now, here's a real important mistake that people make is they often try to real time write these documents. So they get all these inputs. There's a big kumbaya session. Everybody's giving feedback, and then you start go through the document on a video conference, and you tune the document up. Huge mistake. Huge mistake. First off, a real time approach to writing anything is very in the moment. It has very little context. It requires a lot of contextual conversation. It requires a lot of add-ons. It would be better just to simply write a draft, have everybody independently review it, provide a written statement about their position or concern. And by the way, these written statements can simply be bulleted lists. They don't need to be documents or they're just evidence. They're just a position. But then all of that can come together and become a single uniform document. I write a lot of technical papers, white papers, regulatory reports, and businesses want to put their spin on things. But the truth is that these types of reports benefit from accuracy and factual statements. So if you're going to write a white paper about the findings of a test and the findings of this test help you overcome a certain problem, you can't wordsmith the problem. You've got to have a real problem statement. You've got to have a real list of solutions. You may have to disclose failures, drawbacks, and challenges you had in order to make your document more credible. And then ultimately, you'll describe a solution. That solution must make sense without buying the product. So the solution can lead to the purchase of the product, but it ultimately must make sense as reason why this product is important. And so when you start getting the engineers involved, you start getting the business owners involved, everybody gets really, they all want to put their little spin on it. And that makes for a horrible document. Now, it does make for a document that your customer will approve and they'll pay you for because they felt like they've done something. But there's going to be a point where they say, look, if I got to spend all this work, why are we hiring a copywriter? The last point I want to make is it is a mistake to rush these documents. You really do need to allow enough time, and you need to have 1 or 2 drafts and then be done. It's really difficult to know whether your finished piece is appropriate for an audience without testing it. So let's say you're spending 2 or 3 weeks and all these subject matter experts are involved and the management's involved and the sales team's involved. Everybody's looking at this document 100 times. And then suddenly it feels worn out. It feels like it's not going to work. So they tweak it a little bit more to kind of get some excitement back into it. They look at it from a different way. All of this has nothing to do with the end user who could have reviewed a draft of the document in a pilot test and given you some idea whether it worked to create sales, if it worked to generate leads, if it worked for its intended purpose. So sometimes you need to take your draft and say, look, we are done. No more inputs. I'm going to finish off these changes. I'm going to produce a final draft. The final draft is an accept or a deny. Okay? If you deny this document, you provide in writing a bullet point list of why this document is not suited for the intended purpose. Now, of course, up front, you wrote down what the intended purpose was so that you have a criteria for measuring the results, because otherwise it's just a bunch of people sitting around making decisions, and they're all making conflicting decisions. You also need somebody at the end here to be able to say it is done. I like to have some senior level person who has not been involved in the development of the document to be the final yay or nay on the document. There'll be a fresh set of eyes. They'll be in a position to more reflect the audience. And that's really where you ought to start. But the best final decision on your document is to, as you're writing the document, extract elements that you're doing lead generation with. So let's say there are 3 core concepts in a large document. You have a special report or white paper. 3 core concepts. Start doing lead generation around those 3 core concepts to identify which concept you should lead with. If you have 3 selling points or 12 selling points, start doing lead generation around those selling points with small little lead generation pieces, blog posts, different types of pay-per-click, to just see which of these concepts are important to our audience. And then this can actually focus your effort to around what's important to the audience, help you get a draft done, test the draft in front of the audience, and then ultimately roll out a piece that's ready to go. Now you might be saying, well, Justin, I'm ghostwriting a book. How am I going to test a whole book? Well, you don't test a whole book. You test articles. You might have for every chapter, 1 article that pitches the chapter. And it really talks about the reason why this chapter is important. Now, you're not going to spell out why the chapter is important. You're not going to say the chapter. But you can say, hey, I'm working on, if you're ghostwriting, in the voice of your author, you can say, hey, I'm working on a new book about X, Y, and Z. And a very interesting thing came up during the writing of this book. I like to share it with you. And then it shares something, a couple points, and then it says, I would love your feedback about this. And if you're interested, and you basically pre-sell the book. You set up a mailing list of people who want to buy the book so that when the book is done, it goes out and gets adoption, gets purchase. But again, you'll learn something along the way. So I know I've rattled off quite a few mistakes, and there are more mistakes. And if you have any questions about the mistakes people make when they do collaborative editing, I'd be happy to go into details and help you with specific solutions so that you don't have kind of a clown show of a document. The key is that you do have one person editing the final. You have one person in the draft. You have your contributors provide their feedback in writing. But it goes on longer and longer. In fact, I have a program that talks about collaborative editing that shares my experiences with writing thousands and thousands of documents, regulatory documents, white papers, sales letters, lead generation pieces, articles, postcards, brochures, regulatory and policy, controls, business process related and procedural documents. All of these things come together and they have the same foundation when you have multiple inputs and you have a single deliverable. And once you know this, you can get your projects done faster, you can get your projects done more consistently, and you can get projects written not to specification, but to the results and outcomes that your clients want. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. If you have any questions, visit me at www.adbriefings.co.uk. I'm here to help copywriters grow their business and produce more results for their clients. Thanks for listening.